Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the 6-5 podcast. It's Friday. It's not the normal time. Just a few weeks ago, Patrick and I were bragging about how we do anything to make sure our podcast gets delivered at the normal time. And then it only took us 1 week to blow it, but we promise it's your fault, our fault, not yours. Anyways, if you see the skyline behind me, that is not fake. That is a real skyline. I'm here in New York City, and both you and I have made some serious accommodations to make sure that we could be here this week because there's a lot of tech to talk about, and we know why you're here. Pat, how you doing, buddy?
Great. Great to be back. I think I got in my bed at 1 a.m. last night and decided to take an early flight, late flight last night, early this morning versus getting out here. I think was scheduled at 6 a.m. So we can blame the scheduling on me, but I was ready to roll at 9 a.m. So
you were good, man. This was all Daniel's fault. By the way, I just want to point out that that's the second time today I've referred to myself in the third person. I think if I do it one more time, there could be some sort of condition that would need to be diagnosed, not by anyone on this call and hopefully not by anyone listening. So, yeah. But in all seriousness, it's been a very busy week in tech, and we got a great show for you today. If you haven't listened to the 6-5 before, I'm going to ask you what's wrong and why, and then I'm going to remind and tell you that this show is all about analysis. We cover some news, but only as little as we have to. There's plenty of places to get the news. We are here to dive in between the lines and talk about what's happening. It's been a big week for earnings. It's been a big week for new silicon. It's been a big week for some events. Cloudera Evolve, where the 6-5 was on the road rocking out. And then there's some interesting news from AWS that caught your attention, Mr. Patrick, and you're going to talk about, and I'm going to then opine. So we're going to hit a lot of things. So we hit Cloudera, we hit Lattice Semi, we're going to hit Qualcomm, we're going to hit AMD, AWS, and Apple. And we are excited to do that with all of you. Now, quick reminder, this show is for information and entertainment purposes only. And while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, please do not take anything we say as investment advice. All right, take a breath. We did it. We're through the introductions. Pat, you got back from New York, but not without an update from Cloudera. Tell us what was going on at Cloudera.
I don't even know what that question means or what that introduction means. You and I were both in New York City for Moor Insights Strategy, Futurum Group, and the 6-5. So we took in all the analyst content, but we were also there. We had 5 interviews with multiple executives, including the CEO, a few partners. But let me break this down here. So Cloudera is a data management company, and there's a lot of companies that say that that's what they do. But so, for instance, you have kind of ransomware protection, you have data protection, you have security. Companies calling themselves data management, but Cloudera is a little bit unique, and it tracks all the way from the inflow of that data, cleaning up that data. Many times storing that data, let's say in a data lakehouse that's based on Iceberg, and then getting it ready for analytics, machine learning, deploying inference to the edge, and then being able to track all that data, who should have access to it, the lineage of it, how it changed, who has it. So essentially, if a regulator comes in, like they do, particularly in finance and healthcare, that says, hey, I want to know every bit of data that you have that's in the entire enterprise. Who has access to it? How are you protecting it when it changes? And the key here for this event was this was their big generative AI play, right? I think, people who understand this understand that, garbage in, garbage out. You've got to have data, the right data to put in there. But things really changed with generative AI. And while most of generative AI is domain specific, really it's going to be a future that is going to be commingling ERP data, CX data, finance data, confidential information, public information, and that exasperates the data challenge. So there were really one big announcement across three players, and this was an official partner network. And Cloudera introduced AWS, Pinecone, and NVIDIA. And a lot of the conversations on kind of why they chose them is industry leading, right? Industry leading GPU, industry leading IaaS provider, and at least by every metric I've seen, AWS is the AI IaaS leader in terms of the amount of revenue that they generate. Pinecone when it comes to vector database, and NVIDIA being NVIDIA, right? Training and inference. But first and foremost, I hope the takeaway was, and this is not a new takeaway for us, was that if you have a hardcore AI or generative AI, you need a data management platform that spans all of that. And I've been very vocal that it's been a big disappointment from a lot of on-prem plays that they don't articulate what the data management platform is they just ignore it. And while we would expect Cloudera to lead with that because they're a data management company, that doesn't not make it true. It is true. And oh, by the way, the public cloud folks all have an end-to-end data management platform, and their biggest challenge is how do I get the data on-prem? The number you and I throw around, 75 to 90% of enterprise data being on-prem. How do you activate that in the public cloud? So, anyways, I'll leave it at that. It was a big event. I think Cloudera has a big opportunity ahead of them. I think they've got a big marketing challenge ahead of them as well. And they're a PE-owned firm, and they're going against folks who can, at the same revenue level, can spend 10x more on the marketing than they can afford.
Yeah, I think you hit a lot of the really important points. First of all, it's a new look Cloudera. Starts with the management team. Charles Sandsbury, as CEO, is bringing in new leaders. If you go year to year, it's a very different look feel. The company is making some commitments to get away from its sort of deep engineering, geeky roots that I think have plagued it a bit in terms of adoption. At the same time, the company still benefits of being, a majority stakeholder of data management for 5+ of the largest companies in every major industry, which are using Cloudera. Now, I'll say it here, I'll say it there. They need to show that they can create growth with those customers, meaning it's not just legacy Hadoop. It's these customers are going to use and expand their current spend. So it's land and expand. And then it's new customer acquisition. If Cloudera really is up with the times, which we believe it is, I believe it is, it needs to be able to show its muscle by winning new big customers that say this is the platform we want to trust our future to. We want to build our company's data future to be able to solve AI, generative AI, analytical AI problems. So I felt that was on display. I saw more customer cases, more partner focus, a little less geek, but at the same time, that developer ecosystem has to be served. So it's a nuanced challenge. My early inclination is to say Charles seems prepared to play the role in that leadership space, and I think in our conversations with him, he seems to be on the right track, saying the right things. Also, it was good to meet Mary Wells, their new CMO. She brings a wealth of experience and seems to buy into a lot of what you and I have been saying the company needs, which is those case studies. It's those reflective large user wins and the ability to articulate those from a value and solution standpoint, not just from the technology. So good event, good to be there, good to see everybody. Sad you're not here with me right now today, sitting side by side with our sunglasses on in the Hawaiian sun. Oh wait, I'm in New York, forget it.
By the way, for what it's worth, I didn't like that sunglasses look. We looked awkward, and I can't figure out exactly why.
I thought you looked great. You looked like the new thin 210 Pat that I'm so proud of.
Bestie.
Now for me, I looked like I'd been on the road eating, what would be the right word? Unlimited if Old Country Buffet was still open, I look like I've been visiting.
Yeah.
But anyway, let's move on. Next topic. We're gonna hit a few earnings. Let's start with Lattice Semi. Pat, Lattice has been a multi-quarter darling of this chip run and chip glut, and then this chip shortage, and frankly, it was a company that I think we credited, Jim Anderson and his leadership team with running extremely well throughout tumultuous times, getting into the right markets, really creating a strong lead in the low end FPGA space, and the company had another good quarter, record revenue. Now, note, it was slower growth, slower sequential, good margin performance, solid year-on-year earnings per share. But like so many companies, sometimes the kind of that like growth, beat, raise, musical chairs game does stop. This was the quarter where that music did stop. For the first time, and I think it was like a dozen quarters, the guide was conservatively and down for the company. And this is really associated with the industrials. Say that again. The company has rallied with the strength of industrial, but we actually saw in Qualcomm's numbers, which you'll talk about, Silicon Labs numbers, which were both IoT, industrial, and that market just got clobbered. Now, frankly, not the case for Lattice, which had solid performance, but it did slow. And that slowing is what's causing the conservative guidance, and that conservative guidance caused sort of a pretty negative reaction on Wall Street. But coming out of these earnings, I just got to say, Pat, I think the company's really well positioned. I think they've been conservative, they've guided correctly, they've been building the right products, they've been getting into areas like AI, FPGAs for things like computer vision and other in critical designs for security, in laptops, in automotive, in servers. And the company's also expanding into that middle class. It feels like a middle class of FPGAs that doesn't really exist in a significant way. You kind of have that really high end, the Xilinx part of the market, the PSG part of Intel that's spinning off. But on the lower to middle end, Lattice seems really well positioned to gain market share. It's really just ramping. It's a Avant product. And so, while of course we always want the guide up, the drill, Pat, beat, raise, beat, raise. The music can't go forever, but I actually think overall it was a solid quarter amidst some pretty significant headwinds. And if you saw that jobs report that came out today, I think we're going to find out at some point that a lot of the data we've been getting is horse poo-poo for a while now. The feeling in the market isn't nearly as good as what I'm actually seeing in the market, and starting to see some of these slowdowns, some slightly weaker guides, is probably a good thing. And also starting to see turns in some of the things that have been incredibly weak over the last few quarters, years, is also a good sign, because we know the economy is cyclical.
Dan, you left me a little air, not a lot, but
fun. You like to talk about anything you want.
No, listen. None of this is self-inflicted, other than if you look at 14 quarters of revenue, gross margin, EPS, and operating profit improvements as self-inflicted. The markets that are down, they were down in, and there's really, they've done a decent job making up increasing market share, and B, getting into brand new markets that so far, don't yawn on me, buddy, they've been able to overcome, at least eat the yawn, geez. It's like, oh, it's so interesting. But listen, 5G telecom down, not a shock, right? All of IoT. First, it was the consumer IoT, and then it was the industrial IoT, right? Auto up with many automakers, except for Tesla, as we saw with on semiconductor. So, great lineup. They're increasing their TAM with Avant by at least 50%, and so it's not like some big conundrum of where they're going to get their growth from. Markets go up, they're going to go up. They're going to continue to gain market share in areas that their competitors have left uncovered, and even areas where they're converting a low-end processor or microcontroller to an FPGA. So all in all, I'm not panicked, and nobody else should be. I don't trade in the stock. I don't trade in any of our paid clients or anybody I've signed an NDA with. So
you want me to do the disclaimer again, just for everybody?
Sure. Yeah, let it rip, buddy.
This show is for information and entertainment purposes only, and while we will be talking about publicly traded companies, please do not take anything we say as investment advice. And while we do that, let's talk about Patrick Moorhead on CNBC kicking A and taking N. You went on with the always impeccably dressed John Fort and Morgan Brennan. You talked a little bit about Qualcomm, but let's talk about it here.
Yeah, so I actually was on CNBC twice in a week, talking Qualcomm, and I really do appreciate being on Morgan and John's show. So Qualcomm absolutely blew away expectations. It was a beat raise, which was super fun, and surprisingly, they talked about smartphones, which was the big driver, and also automotive, which really hasn't made the bar aside from their $30 billion backlog. So really impressive. And while the company, Cristiano and Akash, and I did appreciate talking to them about earnings, didn't necessarily want to call it the end of the bottom, but I believe that this is the end of the bottom here. They need to be very conservative because they don't control the China economy. But from all my channel checks and all the data that I've seen, the inventory, particularly Android, has gone down. I did want to. IoT was soft, just like everybody else, and we talked about with the context of Lattice, but great tailwinds in handsets. It's interesting. We saw Xiaomi and a couple other of the big Chinese handset makers launch their handsets the same week that Qualcomm came out with Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and that's actually a pull-in on the dates they normally do that, because typically you'll see Qualcomm announce in the fourth quarter and then go live with units in January. And I see that as kind of an acceleration, which I think will benefit the company going forward. I have to talk a little bit about their new PC platform, the Snapdragon X Elite. We'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the Apple event, but they ran up some incredible numbers versus Apple, Intel, and AMD. Now, I did not run the benchmarks, and neither did Futurum Labs, but at least the methodology looked sound enough for me to at least say it's going to be a very competitive part. And we'll talk more about that when it comes to the Apple event and M3.
Yeah, so you did hit it on the head, Pat. Qualcomm was robust. And again, this is a comparative robustness that we have to talk about. I think it's only right. Year on year, it's still not where the company wants to be, but we have to be very clear about the headwinds. You're talking about a company that had over 60% of revenue relationship with China, and an economy in China that's become incredibly uncertain and to some extent unstable. Mid double digit growth in China handset, which means, again, while the diversification strategy I think has worked very well, especially automotive, very impressive transformation there under Nicole DeGaule's leadership. But in handsets, it's been pretty woeful, especially in China. And the concern has been palpable, and the stock has seen a response. But again, this is, Pat, something I think you said about Lattice. This wasn't much self-inflicted. I mean, when you talk about the innovation and the design, what we saw at Snapdragon Summit, the company continues to out-innovate, out-design, deliver better specs, better SoCs, and better performance to all of the handset makers. This is just a byproduct of less people are buying handsets. And even in Apple's number, you saw the device softness. It wasn't like Apple's getting all the market. Nobody is buying smartphone. Now, nobody as in only like 100 billion this quarter. But the I know, dollars, not units. The point though is the growth is coming in the right places. The bottoming out of inventory. We'll talk a bit more about that when we hit AMD here in a moment. But we're seeing a transformation of sort of where the bottom is. So we saw enterprise stand longer. It's been more robust because of AI. We saw industrial devices stick around a little bit longer because companies were implementing technologies to measure and analytics. Handsets, consumer stuff fell off the cliff at the end of the P word, and it's really only slowly coming back. But the slow revival for many people out there that have kind of questioned should be a good indicator, not just Qualcomm, every company in the handset space, all the OEMs. You look at like companies like Dell, HP, Lenovo that have had kind of long, slow periods from their device parts of their businesses, should be turning a corner because the silicon is often the leading indicator of when those cycles are going to begin. And there's a lot of indication here that things are turning. So no one is saying so much as a bottom, Pat, but you and I have talked to a few CEOs this week, including Cristiano Amon, and the positive tenor in their voice is encouraging.
Yeah, you can. Isn't it funny what people can tell you without telling you?
That's the art, right?
Yeah.
Actually, I think we're professional tell you without tell-youers. When you have so much information rattling around in your brain and you're never 100% sure if it was NDA, so you just say nothing.
Yeah.
Really? I got an NDA filter. I need a Gen AI in my eyeball. It's like, nope, that was NDA. Don't say it. Anyways, good job, Qualcomm. Let's rip on to one more earnings, Pat. Let's talk about AMD. You and I actually ran into and had a little time to sit down with CEO Lisa Su when we were at the Dell Tech Analyst Summit. The reason we're not talking about the Dell Tech Analyst Summit, by the way, is because it was all NDA. So we're not going to say anything, but let's just say we did have the chance to spend time with Michael, with Lisa, with a bunch of other Jeff Clark and leaders from the Dell team, and encouraging to listen to them talk about AI. But let's talk about AMD. Okay, long and short, it was a beat. On revenue, margin, and EPS looked good too. But people didn't love it. Why didn't people love it? Because the only thing people care about when you beat is your guide. So when you beat and you guide up, they're happy. When you beat and you guide down, they're not. And it really doesn't matter how much you beat by, because it's kind of the "what have you done for me lately" syndrome. And so everybody's kind of wondering. Now, this is a really weird kind of a tale of two guidances. I think both of you just simultaneously looked at Lisa and congratulated her on the really encouraging guide around AI, the GPU data, GPU number. What it was like 2 billion on the guide of GPU for their MI series. They're telling a very compelling story that moves revenue off potentially of NVIDIA, at the very least. Enables customers that want an alternative to work at the higher layers of abstraction and frameworks with AMD to be able to get workloads on their silicon pretty seamlessly. And at the same time, because gaming's pretty weak, parts of PCs are still only just coming back, there was a very near miss on guide and everybody kind of went ballistic about it. But Pat, I want to talk about a couple of things besides just the beat and raise. The company's operating very well. And so, if you didn't see it, their margin, I think it's up 5%. Like, what a tremendous growth on a year-on-year basis. And operating margin saw significant 5%, increase on year over year. These are good things. When companies are in tougher periods of growth, I always look to, are they operating well? And so we've seen this throughout the past few quarters. When companies are trying to find profit, it's, can they also manage the budget well? Can they manage operations well? Can they manage hiring well? Can they manage production well? Can they manage their
Yeah.
supply chain well? And so there's a lot of indication inside the business that it's not only running for the top end, but it's running to become a much more efficient bottom line production machine. This is a company to be excited about, Pat. This is a company that has a good opportunity to be the number 2 AI company. It's made some very important acquisitions. The Xilinx acquisition, for instance, was very important. It's also making some pretty important moves around AI. It's making some tuck-in acquisitions. It's announced some very interesting partnerships. Pat, this is a company to be encouraged by. And I know you got a little bias here because you were, of course, the strategy chief, corporate development guy. I saw your
Dude, don't even go there, dude.
I saw your street cred. It popped up.
I don't have any bias, dude. I've been gone from that place from 12 years.
Sorry.
And fired from there.
Sorry, buddy. Let me be clear about that. You're very reputed for covering this company, not a bias of like or dislike. Just you're very well known because of your experience.
I heard the word bias, so I'm reacting to that.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I'd be called out. I should be called out for that. My more mean is you're known for your role there. It was a street cred joke. It just didn't land. Let me do that again. I saw your street cred the other day with Fort, where it pointed out that you were the AMD guy. Okay, back in the day.
Yeah.
We blow that out. Let's blow that out. Anyway, point is that solid guide. AI matters. That's what it is. AI matters. Can they land the AI thing? And that's probably my only gripe. My biggest gripe is just like, okay, for a year now, I kind of keep hearing, when is it going to start landing?
Yeah. So good coverage here. I'm going to hit some of the data center highlights. So Dan, you correctly talked about the company waiting for what they could do with AI. And on the call, Lisa announced that that they're going to see $2 billion of revenue in 2024 based on GPU accelerators. And the MI300 is going to be, this is per AMD, the fastest to $1 billion that the company, any product they've ever done. And when I think about Opteron, I think of Ryzen, I think about Epic, I think, maybe I said Athlon before, but it's kind of shocking that this would be the fastest to billion. And quite frankly, when I talk to CSPs and even the enterprise on-prem folks, AMD is the clear number 2 in AI accelerators. And it comes down to a GPU design versus an ASIC. And I love ASICs. They're harder to program too. They're more efficient than GPUs. And there are little blocks of ASICs that are inside of what people call GPUs, but it's just easier to program. Intel does have a data center GPU, and I'll admit I'm trying to figure out why people don't view it as a second or even a third. It appears to me that the market is getting more excited about Habana 2 than anything else. My instinct, no pun there, tells me that Intel GPU is architected more for high performance computing GPU than it is for AI training or AI inference. Because quite frankly, we just don't hear a lot about it. Indicator that the market is back when you look at the PC market is back when you look at what Intel pulled off, but the client segment was up 42%. Okay, so we saw Intel, we saw AMD. That inventory, I can confidently say, has been flushed out of the ecosystem and look like it's doing well. I'm not going to comment on gaming or embedded just because they're not what people are focused on. I mean, gaming, the gaming client revenue, is the largest client. I just said I wouldn't cover it, but I am. But yeah, the revenue is down, and that's really on the back of sell-in of the gaming consoles. It was cited by AMD and a couple of the other things as well. Radeon GPU is actually up, so I'll skip embedded. Well, I won't skip embedded. They were down. Intel was down, and so was Lattice. So no surprise. Industrial markets impacted. Data center stuff is questionable. Move on. But AMD is in the game on AI PCs as well. We haven't heard a lot of details out of it, but they claim to have 50 notebook designs with Ryzen AI in the market today. And they announced a really cool CPU architecture that they announced with notebooks that I don't want to call it big little because that's ARM, and I don't want to call it but even P-core and E-core that Intel is doing. But there's a Ryzen 4 core and a Ryzen 4C, and the C is the small core and the Ryzen is the big core. I'm hearing that it's easier to program than P and an E core, but I don't know that myself. I haven't done the analysis, and neither has Futurum Labs.
Big Pat, little Dan.
There we go.
Big Pat, little Dan. So that was actually some pretty good insight. And that's something that I think our performance lab should probably tear into, and we are tearing deeply into the AI PC. You can keep an eye out for some of that will hit early in 2024. That's going to be a trend line we are going to be talking about a lot. Pat, AWS, dropped some interesting news this week. Talk about what they're doing with their machine learning capacity blocks.
Yeah, it's interesting. In all this world of generative AI and all this stuff.
If you're still ML?
Are we still doing ML? Yes, we absolutely are doing ML. And quite frankly, for narrower data sets than generative AI, which can be up to 100 petabytes at this point just for the training model, it's more efficient and less expensive. So I saw that, Dan. Saw that.
I bet.
Okay, no, this is good. So, but one of the challenges for, let's say, smaller businesses and even startups is, how do I come in there and reserve enough GPUs to do what I need to do, right? It's not just one GPU. When you're doing machine learning training, let's say you're trying to train a vision model or something like that, you need hundreds of GPUs that are interconnected in a logical way, that have a singular memory plane to be able to do all that work on. And so what Amazon did is they brought out what's called capacity blocks for ML, for machine learning workloads. And what that does is you can actually schedule it like a hotel, right? Which says, hey, on January 5th, I need this much capacity for my GPUs, maybe for this long. And what they do is they reserve that. And these are EC2 Ultra clusters, which means that they're of the highest performance, optimized for ML. And then they're connected through what's called EFA, which is elastic fabric adapter, because we all know that it's not just about what you can do on that rack, but what you can do across multiple racks. And EFA gives you what they're calling petabit scale non-blocking network, which essentially is to get your workload done a lot quicker, and again to have that planar memory. So that's it, baby. AMSL capacity blocks. Look at this space. I see no reason why they also wouldn't do 1,000 node systems for foundational models. But that's just a prediction.
Read my lips. This will get bigger. Pat, I mean, why I think this is also important is, I don't know about you, but I'm really kind of getting tired of having to always say, I know everyone thinks AWS is behind on generative AI. You know what I'm saying? Like, I feel like if I don't,
I know it came up in even our interviews yesterday.
It came up, and like I'm going cross-eyed, and it's like,
yeah,
look, AWS has more workloads on more compute across more geographies than I think like pretty much all the hyperscalers combined. Yeah. Now, again, that's funny math, so don't hold me to it. But the reason I'm pointing that out is compute and data and workloads are the sort of impetus of AI. And so AWS had a different strategy, and it wasn't based upon necessarily like completely locking it up with a single large language model and a kind of a closed architecture, which some others did early on, and were able to get good out the gate marketing and story narrative leads. But AWS has kind of taken we're going to be the open source, we're going to be open in our approach. We'll offer some FMs, foundational models. We'll offer, Titan. We'll offer Bedrock. We'll offer API connectors. You can run multiple models same time, all that kind of stuff. So, Pat, I just kind of chalk this up to AWS being AWS, offering lots of services, looking at how do you take all of its capacity, add value, and make it easier for companies to do the things that are going to need to be done. And as we know, there's going to be more and more smaller models, middle-sized models, foundational models, and the large language models are increasingly commoditized. They're going to be increasingly we're kind of seeing a world where, Hugging Face is GitHub for AI, and that's kind of where this is going, and there's competition for that. But I think it's a good use of resources. So I don't have a lot more to say about it. It's early, so I think we can save ourselves a bit of time, Pat, and talk about the spooky, scary event that took place.
Spooky, scary event
of the M3's 18 tops being the next gen AI PC. All right. Well,
can we take that I don't think we can take it any farther.
No, I got nothing.
No, listen, Apple scheduled a 30-minute event during an NFL game and during the World Series the day before Halloween. I guess it could have been even worse. It could have been on Halloween, which distinctly indicated to me that this was a complete and total rush job to respond to a couple things. First of all, was Qualcomm coming out and doing the smackdown and showing these were measured by Qualcomm and not Moor Insights and Strategy or Futurum Labs, but they were industry standard benchmarks that they let us watch them perform. And they showed this incredible performance per watt, not just with the 45 tops, but also with this incredible CPU that they put in here that, Qualcomm didn't have the numbers, but showed that it outperformed, didn't have M3 numbers, but showed that it outperformed pretty much all of the M2 line. And then Apple's Rush Spooky event was also a reaction to what Intel is doing, where they're talking about the AI PC, where CEO Pat Gelsinger is talking about on earnings calls. They made an announcement about 100 ISV. I saw that, Dan, that would support it. And
long day, everybody.
Yeah, they would support that. And then at the Intel Innovation event, Intel talked about it as well. So all of these things going on, you've got AMD, right, talking about their AI PC. So Apple had to feel some pressure. And by the way, folks, according to some industry analysts that are not mine or Dan, Apple units went down 24%. And I saw that as not that people don't like Macs, but they stuffed the channel the quarters before, because these analyst reports are about sell in, right? They're stuff that was sold into the channel, not consumption and sales out. And what we saw yesterday was that Mac revenue went down 34%. So you can imagine all the pressures of this. But let me cut to the chase. M3 looks like the same microarchitecture as M2 and M1. It is on a potentially improved process, which is the quote unquote 3 nanometer TSMC process. We saw some challenges with the iPhone 15 when it came in with their quote unquote 3 nanometer TSMC process-based processor that led me to believe that they were having issues because of the overheating. And just because they could fix it with a software tweak doesn't mean it wasn't a chip issue, because how often does Apple screw this up, right? Like, you do thermals and you do software around a certain guardrails of your chips. So hence we have M3, where I expected just a desktop, but we got an iMac plus a MacBook Pro. We did not get errors. And when I step back and I look at I look at what's going to happen in the industry in the middle of the year, I believe I've seen numbers. Again, I didn't run these numbers myself, that Qualcomm Snapdragon X Elite will outperform at least the M3 Pro version on single-threaded and multi-threaded CPU benchmarks. Didn't run it, just speculating. And it appears that the Snapdragon X Elite will have 2.5 times the NPU performance as the Apple event. And the reason I'm putting so many disclaimers here, folks, is not just that I didn't run any of these numbers myself, but that there are no independent third-party reviews of any M3 based product. So net, I still think that Qualcomm looks really good mid-year. And I think that this is not going to be some M3 comes in and wipes everybody up again, like we saw with M1. And it makes sense, right, Dan? You pointed out on the AMD thing that I used to work there and a couple other things. But here's what I know. Here's what I learned over many years. You can't stretch a microarchitecture too far. 3 variations, and then you can make it smaller. You can attach them together like Intel has intelligently done. You can go to new packaging, and the competition still has yet to do integrated memory like Apple does. That gives it a little bit of an advantage there, but it is getting long in tooth. Okay, and I would expect that this Rev 4 M4 would have to be a brand new microarchitecture. TSMC is slowing down. It's hard to get the benefits of doing transistor level architectural shifts. You could throw a bunch of more cache on there, but cache means it's a bigger chip. Anyways, I've gotten so geeky. I just need to stop.
You covered my topic well. Thank you.
Oh my gosh. Was this your topic first?
Who's counting? But the
God, I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay. I kind of paused for a minute and you jumped right in there. So look, I actually will just make a couple of little ads and then we'll send everybody on their way. First of all, this seemingly was a reaction, and we can speculate, but a reaction to the impressive outputs from the week prior, just based on when it booked, when it came out, and the fact that it was kind of awkwardly timed. To their credit, I actually wish they would do all their events this quickly. I'll watch it
30
back.
minutes.
I don't need 2 hours. You do it all in 30. Let's speed it up. Because for me, I like to consume it in less time. I think your point about microarchitecture is very important. I think that clearly there's some issue with TSMC and what they're getting out of the 3 nanometer. It just doesn't seem generationally like it's that big of an improvement. And to your kind of comments about the Mac numbers, it's a little scary out there. That's not good performance.
What's scary is a 34% revenue decline.
34%. But to your point, they kind of held stronger when others were doing really bad. So at some point, maybe the theme of this is the music has to stop.
Yeah.
The music has to stop. And I think at some point it's their time. Now they had that 8th quarter of revenue decline or whatever it was, or 4th quarter. I can't remember what it was. It's a big difference, by the way, 4 and 8. But I know it's a multi-quarter decline, and that is alarming. Having said that, by the way, kind of unrelated to the event, but Apple did see 16% growth in services. And you do know that the hardware era is going to end. And that is the one part that I kind of wonder if they can get that going. And by the way, Pat, 16, I know, not that exciting. Look at you.
No. What do we know now is that the, I don't know, $20 billion that Google pays Apple is part of that service revenue. If not all of it.
It's a pretty important one, ain't it?
No, isn't that like it came out? So there was a redacted, but what came out through the Google FTC, I'm like, I'm 80% sure of this, by the way, but I tracked, like, where else would it show up?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's material. It's material for sure. And so that's going to be an interesting part of their business to watch. Now, Pat, one big thing too is this: the neural processor doesn't cut it. It just doesn't. It's not going to cut it for what these AI kind of PCs are trying to do longer term. Now, again, Apple might have another announcement in 3 months, and it might be at 50 tops or whatever. But at this spec, it doesn't seem to be very compelling in that particular arena, which is, it's going to be important, and I guess we'll see longer term. But I'm not running to a store to buy an M3 if I'm an Apple customer, and I have an iMac. I'm not seeing generation to generation improvements that encourage me to run store to store. But let's face it, they haven't been doing that with their phones either. So I guess for people that care about performance, maybe that's not really where Apple wants to play. Someone said to me the other day, the people that buy Apple can't spell Qualcomm. So the question mark is always going to be, are they going to be the best marketing company? And they probably are, probably have been, probably will be. But from a technology standpoint, I'm going to yawn one last time before I end the show. All right, buddy. And there we have it. 6 topics, not 5 minutes each. The 6-5 brings it every single week. Sorry about those yawns. I gave you the 6th topic because I felt like I owed it to you after falling asleep your last 2 times you were talking. But in all seriousness, another great show, great week. It's great to see you, spend some time together. I'm heading to VMware Explore in Europe for a couple of days. Then you and I will meet back in New York again for IBM's research event. So stick with us, stay with us. We appreciate you. We appreciate all of you out in the community. For this week, for this episode, for Patrick Moorhead and myself, we're out of here. See ya. Bye-bye.